Hey everybody, we're going to start a new unit on the civil rights movement that takes place from the 50s into the 70s. We'll kind of cross a few other things on there as we go through the 60s as well. And just notes we live review here, a few new things. We're kind of go all the way back to the beginning of the year in the 1800s. Look at some of the things for African Americans since then and some of the issues that are taking place in the country regarding people's civil rights. Now, remember, there are Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws said he was both separate but equal. Jim Crow laws were used to kind of keep African Americans down in the years post Civil War. They started after the Reconstruction era, Reconstruction being that time after the Civil War, right after we kind of put the country back together. Most of these laws were designed basically to, as I said, hurt African Americans, make sure they couldn't vote, couldn't participate in society. And the idea of separate but equal really came out here. Now, a lot of people ask, what are we talk about civil rights movement? What are civil rights? Well, the actual dictionary definition reads here: the rights of citizens to political and social freedom and equality. Break that down a little bit. Citizens is everybody in the country who is considered to be a citizen. Allows you to be you, essentially. Okay, what you want to do for you, what your life you want to live, job you want to work, those kind of things. Equal opportunities for jobs, money, life, house, all those kind of things. To participate politically, a chance that you can vote, run for government, all that, and also equal protection under the law. Make sure you are being treated the same as everybody else is being treated. That is what civil rights comes down to. And in the 2.5 weeks or so we're looking at this unit, we have two big questions to answer. These are written on your note sheet ready for you, but how were African American civil rights violated decades following Reconstruction? Actually, we can honestly even expand that out a little bit, if you will, to essentially everybody's rights. We can actually expand it out to not just women, but everybody for that matter. And also, how do African Americans react to discrimination, segregation, and what do they do to fix it? Kind of the two big questions we're going to look at here. And so today's we're focused on the civil rights that are gained during Reconstruction. Now, remember, there are three amendments that were passed during Reconstruction after the Civil War. The big one being the 13th Amendment. So this amendment banned slavery in the United States. It said nobody can be a slave unless you're being a slave for some kind of punishment, like you're in prison. So, like if you're on a work detail in prison, like that kind of stuff, that's like legal, slavery type thing, if you will. But no involuntary servitude except for punishment by crimes. The 14th Amendment that said that everybody who is born here is a citizen. Grant citizenship to everybody in the U.S. essentially. And it said that no matter what race you can be white, black, brown, purple, green, yellow, pink with purple spots, whatever, you are a citizen no matter what. And you have certain rights, and all those rights are equal. Now, how the 14th Amendment is interpreted is a big deal. Some people read it as everybody has rights. Other people says it's kind of a suggestion. It's kind of a big question. Kind of came down to what do the writers think it was in the 1860s when former slaves are now free versus in the 1890s, the 1900s, 1950s. The kind of big question of how do you interpret, how do you read into that document at that time, which we'll kind of take a look at in our unit here. The last one was the 15th Amendment that said that the right to vote cannot be denied on base of race. So all males at 1860 over the age of 21 could vote, not depending on race. So it didn't matter white, black, whatever, you could vote. Obviously, that adds in women as well in 1920. Now, there are a lot of Supreme Court cases that are brought about these amendments. Anytime you have the Constitution involved, the Supreme Court makes decisions if laws are constitutional or not. So there's a law that people feel is not right, it goes against the Constitution. You can appeal that law for review up to the Supreme Court. And so a lot of times the Supreme Court will interpret these amendments, okay? They read through them and decide, what do I think it is? Is this, based off this amendment, is this law okay or not? Now, whenever you see a Supreme Court case, we're looking at a bunch of them in this unit. We're read through a mess in this unit here. They're written in a certain way. Always blank versus blank with the date. The plaintiff is the person making the complaint, making the argument, saying something's not right. Second person is your defendant, the person being complained against. And then it's always written, said plaintiff versus defendant, and the date. So if I was complained about some Mr. Harnish, it would be Musak v. Harnish 2014. That's kind of how we'll talk about Supreme Court cases. Now, the first case that really kind of held back African Americans decision-wise were called the slaughterhouse cases. Now, this is what you involve African Americans. It was in the city of New Orleans, down Louisiana. And butchers were all located in one part of the city. And when they would butcher animals, they would dump all the guts and blood and stuff into the river, and people downstream had their drinking water impacted. But people complained. Louisiana made the butchers move to a different area. And the butchers then promptly sued the government. They said, hey, it's not fair. You make us move. You make us leave where we are. Uh, it violates our civil rights. You are picking on us because we are a certain person. We have the right to put our building any place we want to. Get all the way up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court gets this case and they say, you know what? This is a state issue, not a federal issue. They said we, the federal U.S. government, they'll take care of this kind of stuff. And that civil rights issues, like, how you live your life, where you put your business, that kind of thing, those are state things. And the states can make their own laws. The 14th Amendment doesn't always apply to every case. This basically took a lot of power away from that 14th Amendment in terms of making it work for African Americans to make things equal. It's that the states can basically make the laws they want to, and the federal government had nothing to say about it. So now if the state want to make a segregation law, they could. And so that's kind of why the slaughterhouse cases are really important. You also have United States versus Crookshank. This was 1876. What happened was in a place called Colfax, there was a massacre. A group of whites attacked a bunch of freemen, for African Americans who were former slaves. It was a big riot, big fight happened, and a bunch of people were, killed as part of this. And the leaders of the white mob, they were arrested for trying to, stop the Reconstruction process. They're trying to stop Reconstruction moving on. Well, they argue that their First and Second Amendment rights, so the right to free speech by having a riot, the right to carry a gun, the use of the massacre, were being violated. So all goes up to the Supreme Court. Ruling was state governments can let violators of civil rights cases go because of the previous decision. It's called precedent. And that previous decision of the slaughterhouse cases kind of said that, you know what? If the state wants to let civil rights violators go, they can. It's a state issue. The states need to decide the civil rights, not the federal government. Strike two. U.S. v. Reese. Now, a lot of times states use different ways to stop African Americans from voting. There are poll taxes, which meant you had to pay a certain amount of money to go vote. There are literacy tests. You had to pass a certain test to be able to go vote. And a grandfather clause, which was designed to stop African Americans from voting, because if your grandfather didn't vote, you couldn't vote either. Hence, that means that, then you couldn't vote. A lot of times, the states made these laws to keep African Americans out of voting, make sure that anybody African American wanted to be in office wouldn't be in office. Well, the U.S. government sues the states, and they lose. Okay, the Supreme Court said, you know what, the right to vote is there, just there's certain requirements you got to do. Now, African Americans, poor sharecroppers, farmers, they couldn't afford to pay a poll tax, so they couldn't vote. A lot of these guys had never had an education. They couldn't read or write. They couldn't pass the literacy test. And if their grandfather hadn't voted well, they couldn't vote then either. Now, remember, the right wasn't being taken away, just, the requirements. More civil rights cases happened too. Private businesses had been refusing service to African Americans, and so these businesses were sued. Well, the court says private businesses are allowed to discriminate on race. Kind of the most recent case in Indiana, when the United States government says that if a business doesn't want to serve somebody because they think they're gay, then they don't have to. The court in 1883, it was also true for African Americans that they said you can discriminate based on race and who you hire and who you serve. And all those cases came up there. The big case, the one that really kind of set the big precedent for being separate but equal, was a case of Plessy v. Ferguson. We talked about this earlier this year. Here's a little, reminder type thing going on. Homer Plessy was a guy who was 1/8 African American. And essentially he sat in a white rail car down in Louisiana. Rail cars were segregated. Black car, white car. Well, they told Plessy to move. He didn't move. He was arrested for violating that law. And then he decided, and obviously NAACP actually or the groups that were trying to get segregation ended, they, set him up on purpose to try and prove this point. Well, they ended up pushing this case all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the ruling said it was okay. The way they read the 14th Amendment, as long as the facilities are equal, separation is okay. That's where separate equal comes into, and the idea of segregation. So if the white rail car and the black rail car are the exact same, it's all good. If the white school and the black school are the same, it's fine. As long as it's equal, it's okay to be separate. Question is, are they really equal? That's the question. Now, understand, discrimination changed in terms of segregation, separating African Americans and whites. In the South, it was legal. In the North, it happened, but it wasn't like a legal type thing. We'll talk about that in a second. Um, what kind of things are segregated is a huge question. There's schools, buses, beaches, water fountains, restaurants, restrooms. I mean, pretty you name it, it was segregated during the 50s and before that, especially down south. Now, talking about segregation, it's separating those two groups. And obviously, Plessy versus Ferguson allowed that. But there are really two groups, two different types of segregation. There's what's called de jure segregation, this one here, which is forced by the government. That's an actual law saying you got to be separate or you go to jail. If you break that law, you can get arrested and get in trouble. There's also what's called de facto segregation, segregation by choice. So sometimes, especially in northern cities, there'd be the white part of town, black part of town, Hispanic part of town, and so on and so forth. That there was no legal law saying it, but basically, things worked out so there are different neighborhoods either by choice or by just kind of the forcing of the city. But de jure was law you saw in the south. De facto was more the unofficial segregation you saw in the north. There's also the lynching still going on. Vigilante trials against African Americans. If you're accused do something wrong, it could be from voting, rape, interracial dating, and that kind of stuff. Young African Americans could be arrested, captured, beat, and then hanged by a big crowd. We heard the story with Dr. James Cameron earlier this year in Indiana, and it said it happened all over the country up through the 50s yet, and especially in Mississippi where there's more than 500 lynchings since 1882. There are more than 500 lynchings that took place. The lynching really took a lot of people's attention. Was those men like KKK. Now obviously the KKK was not as strong as it was in the 20s, but definitely still existed. I mean, they held big rallies yet. They still burned crosses in people's yards as warnings not to be voting, not to be causing trouble, not to be arguing, not to be saying things to be equal. They take people out back, especially African Americans, and beat them up. Or if there were whites who were trying to support African Americans, they beat them up too. Churches and buildings got bombed and blown up. They helped do lynchings, that kind of thing. So all these things kind of came as part of that. Now, one of the biggest, cases of 1955, called the Emmett Till case. Now, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old black boy from Chicago, down visiting friends and family in the state of Mississippi. Now, what happened was he had went with some friends down to a store, and he basically whistled or kind of hit on a 21-year-old white woman who was running the store. He kind of said, hey, baby, that kind of thing, or how you want to get with, that kind of deal. He was from the north, Chicago. He didn't really understand how things were, and he didn't get that, you didn't do that kind of stuff in the South. That was not allowed. In fact, African Americans and whites weren't even allowed to really look at each other, let alone talk to each other, and especially the idea of interracial dating was forbidden in a lot of southern states. Well, lady freaks out, and the kids, they run away and stuff, and he was kind of dared to by his friends, those kind of things. Well, the woman tells her husband what happened, who had been gone working, and he and his friends go and they abduct Emmett, kidnap him, they beat him up, mutilate him, shot him in the head, and then threw him in the river with the fan from a cotton gin around his neck. You can see the pictures from the newspaper down here. My battery's running low. I see the picture down here of what he looked like afterwards. Now, the men who did this were arrested, put on trial, and found innocent by an all-white jury. And later on, they actually admitted to the murder and said, yep, we did it, but they couldn't be retried because of the laws the idea of double jeopardy. So obviously, this case, we got public, hey, this stuff was going on in the newspapers, and in fact, Emmett Till's mother insisted on having an open casket funeral because, well, she wanted to show what people had done to her boy and the case. Obviously, there's the NAACP at this time, National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples, founded by W.E.B. Du Bois. They tried to use the courts to get anti-lynching laws, try to make some gains in equality. They did, definitely did, but it wasn't really going fast enough for some people. And obviously, last slide here, but World War I and World War II made a big difference too. You had the Great Migration happening during World War I, people moving north and out west. You had African Americans serving in the armed forces in segregated units. You had the Korean War happening with the supposed to be integrated units, and all the work in factories, all the efforts that Americans gave for their country. And they're saying, hey, you know what? We're fighting for all this stuff, and are we really getting freedom? We're supposed to be fighting for democracy. Are we being represented? Are we getting what we deserve? We're getting low segregation, poor treatment, lower wages. It's not right. We're going to see how that gets taken care of going forward, or at least how things are fought for change after this. Thanks, everybody. These do Friday. See you later.